The in itself, for itself, and in and for itself speculative triad is a much mentioned formula of the speculative method. But despite its common use, its meaning is rarely explained or intelligible. This is because this triad, particularly the moment of for itself, is not linguistically intuitive, unlike most of Hegel's terminology. The instance of this formula, which is intuitive, is a syllogism of the concept of consciousness, first set forward in the Phenomenology of Spirit, and its term names as moments concern the following. Quote, "For consciousness is on the one hand consciousness of the object, on the other hand consciousness of itself, consciousness of what to it is the true, and consciousness of its knowledge of the true." From the Phenomenology of Spirit. Being in itself. Being in itself is the immediate and implicit. It is for consciousness, but it is not fully expressed or known in its relations. In this moment, consciousness does not consider the object in relation to consciousness. The object is taken as the truth independent of any mediation by knowing or experience. Being for itself. The mediate and partially explicit. What is for itself here is not the being in itself, but consciousness which takes itself to be in its own immediacy as mediation of the object. That is, the transcendental mediator of the being in itself, that which projects form onto the content. Consciousness is for itself, the knowing of the objects which are in themselves. Consciousness here holds itself as other to the immediate objects, that is, as pure mediation. This is the Kantian moment of philosophy, where the hidden mediation of the mind becomes explicit, but the object remains implicit and unknown since it is immediate, and knowing is mediation, which can never grasp it as immediate or in itself. Here consciousness splits being in itself as something outside being for itself, knowing. Knowing is pure mediation, the former of objects, but not the source of the immediate content that is formed. Being in and for itself. Being in and for itself is the self-mediating and fully explicit. It is consciousness that knows objects, knows the knowing of objects, and knows the knowing of objects. That is, it is an absolute knowing. This standpoint sublates the prior moments and idealizes them. Here it is known that object and knowing co-determine, and that neither is the foundation or ground of the other. What is known is knowing itself, and what is in itself is known as the product of the process of knowing. This is because what knowing knows is revealed to always be an objectification or reification of itself. An ontology is determined by an epistemology, and epistemology is determined by an ontology. In each, the other is hidden at first, but proper philosophical investigation unveils the ruse of one-sided understanding. To summarize once again, being in itself is the immediacy of consciousness, the simple knowing of objects. Being for itself is the pure mediation of consciousness. It is the knowing of objects. Being in and for itself is the self-mediated immediacy of consciousness. It is the knowing of knowing itself. It does not merely know another. It does not merely know itself as the knowing of another. It knows itself as the knowing of knowing. Its object is itself, its mediation is itself. As with many of Hegel's speculative formulas, this one has specific instances across the system. The specificity of being in itself as immediacy, being for itself as mediation, and being in and for itself as self-mediation concerns the syllogism's determinacy in the doctrine of being. Within the doctrine of essence, it is determined differently, and this is the most well-known explanation given to the terms: being in itself as possibility or potentiality, implicit but not indeterminate or immediate as such, being for itself as actuality, explicit and reflective, a higher mediation, and being in and for itself as necessity. In the sphere of the doctrine of the concept, we find the concept to be the in itself as subjectivity, for itself as objectivity, and in and for itself as the idea. With regard to the logic as a whole, being is the in itself, essence the for itself, and concept the in and for itself. One can apply the formula at any step of the logic at various levels of triads, but one must not make too much of a fuss about this kind of syllogism or terminology. It is, as are all of Hegel's speculative formulas, only a formula, which means nothing without a grasp of the material over which it qualifies. If one knows the content, it does not really add anything to one's knowledge, and if one does not, it only hints at the general dynamic relation, but does not thereby explain it.